Let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's a CBSN political contributor and national political reporter for RealClearPolitics. All right, so Caitlin, how do you think that the president's criticism of the mayor of San Juan changes the storyline here when it comes to the federal response?
Well, it was very interesting to see this coming from the president, but not entirely surprising. We saw for the course of the campaign, when there were different terrorist attacks or other national events here at home, that he does not like to be blamed or criticized. In fact, sometimes he would talk a lot about the way in which he was praised for his responses to things like that. So this is certainly a defensive posture of the president. You know, he's been blamed for not paying requisite attention to Puerto Rico. The country, of course, is still without power, and the report that you played earlier identified lots of the things that are still going on there. The president is supposed to go there on Tuesday, and we will see whether that is a chance for him to turn the page, so to speak, actually meeting with people who have been affected, seeing the damage firsthand and assessing it himself, and we'll see what comes out of this. We also know that, you know, he could be in unscripted moments there. He could continue this kind of rhetoric, or he could change the page a little bit.
Yeah, so to follow up on that a little bit, what are the implications here of this when it comes to not just sort of a leadership issue, but as a political moment for a president who has been known to communicate via tweets in a very sort of blunt way, but then also in person has also been known to demonstrate the kind of empathy, as we saw in previous hurricanes, that was very much sort of expected of a president of the United States. Right,
exactly. I mean, as we've talked about before, in times of crisis like this, people look to the president for leadership, for some of an energy, kind of inciting some kind of hope for the people there. Instead, a lot of, seeming to blame things on local officials there, which also may be part of the story. And what's interesting about this is that when you compare it to the way in which he handled Florida and Texas in their times of natural disaster, very much encouraging Congress to spend the money to get relief there quickly, hasn't really done that with Puerto Rico. I think there was a way for him to kind of identify the challenges that Puerto Rico presents compared to Texas or Florida, insofar as he's talked about the fact that it's an island, that it makes it difficult for people to get there, and all the different dynamics laid out. If he had kind of laid that out in terms of, instead of criticism of the local officials there, perhaps it would have played differently.
Let's turn to another issue. Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price resigned amid scrutiny of his use of a private plane. Mr. Trump said that he was not happy with Mr. Price, and I wonder what message does Price's resignation, you think, actually send to other cabinet officials, but also to the president's base?
Well, this issue really hit at the core of President Trump's message over the campaign trail, which was drain the swamp. And a lot of people took that to mean kind of getting these kinds of things, spending taxpayer money without caution, really, I think, struck at people's chords a little bit. And so this was an issue that I think really spoke to that. Interestingly enough, though, the former HHS secretary was not able to get the health care repeal bill over the finish line. And so I wonder, you know, if that had put him on bad terms already with the president, gave him kind of one more reason to let him go or accept his resignation. But I think the question remains whether there is a culture established at the White House that encourage this kind of behavior. The president has hired a lot of people who are kind of wealthy and used to taking private charters. So that's one question that remains. The others are that, you know, there has been reporting about other trips taken by members of the cabinet. So if there's another shoe to drop, I think that's what lots of people are focused on.
Meantime, the president's tax agenda is heading to Congress for debate. House Speaker Paul Ryan spoke to John Dickerson for Face the Nation. Let's go ahead and play a clip of that.
The Affordable Care Act, it didn't make it through in the Senate. Why is it going to make it through in the Senate this time?
You talking about tax reform? I think it will make it through for a few reasons. Number one, we did this on the front end. We negotiated a framework so that we all agree what this needs to look like at the front end. In healthcare, what we did was we passed a bill in the House, and then the Senate looked at our bill and decided to go a different direction, and here we are. We have more consensus on tax reform as Republicans, and we have less consensus on healthcare reform as Republicans.
All right, so assess the Speaker's argument there. He's suggesting that they're going to have an easier time on tax reform compared to health care.
Tax reform, as we've talked about before, is arguably a much more complicated issue because of all the stakeholders involved in making reforms to tax structure. This is an issue that the president and Republicans believe can really strike at the heart of economic issues. They are facing questions, though, about who benefits from these tax changes and also who pays for them. It is notable, though, that there is much more synergy, I would say, on tax reform than there was healthcare. Republicans and aides I've been talking to all week on Capitol Hill say it is a remarkable difference between the way they are handling taxes and the way they are handling healthcare. You saw the president really on the same page, helping to roll out the agenda,
some message discipline going on.
Some message discipline, exactly. House Republicans got some buy-in from outside groups who are typically critical of them, and also from some conservative holdouts. The big thing to remember, though, is that there is not actual legislation yet, right? They're still kind of working through this process. But to bring this back to Tom Price, I mean, the reason that kind of thing is really important here is that the Republicans and the president are proposing tax changes that could affect middle-income Americans, very much the people that are part of Trump's coalition, against the backdrop of having taxpayer money spent unwisely, I should say. So I think that was kind of hovering over this whole debate as well.
Yeah, not the best optics, perhaps.
Right, exactly.
Let's turn to foreign policy. The president seemed to tweet at his own Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, on Sunday. Tillerson is in China for talks on trade in North Korea. The president wrote, quote, "I told Rex Tillerson, our wonderful Secretary of State, that he is wasting his time trying to negotiate with little rocket man. Save your energy, Rex. We'll do what has to be done." And of course, little rocket man is President Trump's name for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. What does that statement do to Rex Tillerson's negotiating position, you think, Caitlin?
Right. We're trying to figure out what the strategy here is. And
Good cop,
certainly,
bad cop.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we've talked about that before. It certainly seems to undermine the Secretary of State heading into any kinds of negotiations on this. But the president has also said that the avenue that they want to take is the diplomatic one first. And then if, then kind of having these threats, I should say, still on the table. Nikki Haley has talked about that as well. And so this certainly undermines Rex Tillerson on this really key, important stage and raises the question about whether the president is considering a different avenue than diplomatic solutions first, or whether he is trying to play the good cop, bad cop situation.
Finally, Caitlin, the president engaged on this issue of national anthem demonstrations for a second week in a row, urging players to stand during Sunday's game. Who do you think the target audience is for the president's message on that?
Well, this is certainly a message to the people that supported him. Certainly, he talked about this on the campaign and throughout his presidency. Also, I think this speaks to a larger issue. I don't think that it's unnecessary for a president to engage in something like this. I actually think this is an important kind of civil rights movement in our country, or moment in our country. There is a message certainly coming from these players on the NFL, and a president who is so intertwined in culture, especially, could weigh in on that. The criticism, of course, is that he is telling them kind of what to do, and also not recognizing what the message that they are trying to convey is. And so I think this is more intentional than some of the other things that we've seen him do. He talked about it. The vice president talked about it while in Alabama last week. The RNC has weighed in, supporting the president, and you've been hearing from lots of Republican lawmakers too that they kind of understand where the president is coming from. So this is directed towards a base, and we've seen him do this in times of conflict before. Remember, his agenda is in flux. He just faced that tough Alabama Senate race. Some other things, of course, going on the world stage. We've seen him return to kind of his base of support, to gin up support on an issue like this, a culturally divisive issue like this. And he
was
tries
facing
to play
attacks on
it to his
immigration,
hands.
right?
Exactly.
When he reached out to Democrats, that was not something that was seen by some within his base as a move they necessarily would have expected.
Right, exactly. So trying to endear himself again to his base of support at a critical time.
Right. Caitlin Huey-Burns, always great to have you. Thanks so much, Caitlin.
Thank you.